A lot is being said about double standards practices today. A lot is being spoken about its repercussions and impacts on the global order. But do we have enough knowledge about double standards as a political term? What is the legal essence of this term and how it affects international security? I will discuss these issues with Farid Shafiyev, the chairman of the Center of Analysis of International Relations. Mr. Shafiyev, thank you for taking the time and joining us. Let me put it simply. What are the double standards?
Indeed, it's a good subject for the research. There is no legal definition of double standards, but let's say the conventional wisdom speaks about an unfair treatment of events when you have one approach, whether it's the diplomatic, legal, political approach to one issue, and similar events or similar situation, you treat it differently. And especially in Azerbaijan, we know what is double standards because we faced that from the first day of the conflict and throughout the whole conflict and in post-conflict situation today, we see repeatedly similar question related to territorial integrity, to sovereignty. It's treated differently by experts, by politicians, by countries. And double standard is not just, let's say, something in the domain of journalism, media, or academia. It is there too, but double standards affect the policy making, opinion of policymakers, let's say. It has repercussion for the fate of people on the ground. That's why I think the double standard is something should be discussed at larger scale at international organizations. But probably the sad truth that we're going to face double standards in the future.
What kind of factors lead to the application of double standard practices? Does it emanate from objective factors or are there any personal reasons or ambitions as well?
There's different reasons, and if we consider, let's say, conflict in Ukraine or in Middle East, in Africa, in Latin America, we're at different grounds, but let's focus on what we know the best now, the situation in the Caucasus, in the South Caucasus situation between Armenia and Azerbaijan. I think when we speak about double standards, indeed, we speak about probably a combination of factors. Let's look what happened in briefly. We don't have time for a long historical overview. Armenian nationalists launched a campaign to unite part of Azerbaijani internationally recognized territory to Armenia based on the historical grounds. We see it all the time in Europe, in Eurasia, in other parts of the world. When one country claims the part of territory of another country, referring to some historical reasons, 500 years ago, 200 years ago, 1,000 or 2,000, doesn't matter. But we have international law, we have established borders. So this is what happened. Basically, Armenia launched this campaign. Then in 92, 94, they invaded and occupied our territories. I mean, the term occupation is reflected in the United Nations Security Council resolution. So that's the, let's say, in nutshell situation. 30 years was we've suffered from occupation. We've seen that the countries which spoke about the primacy of international law, primacy of territorial integrity, they treated differently situation of Azerbaijan. Basically, they were silent. And today, after conflict ended, after Azerbaijan restored its territorial integrity, those policymakers, those experts and academicians, they treat the situation as it's nothing happened before, let's say, the latest war, 2020. And we see that they single out one ethnic group, Armenians, let's say, sufferings and, their grievances, fully disregard what happened for 30 years. So that's another manifestation. But when it comes to the factors, there are a number, as I said. One, I think that the biggest factor from my perspective, it's the so-called Orientalism. Orientalism, it's well-known phenomena, and it's well studied with regard to many, let's say, Muslim majority countries, so generally to the east. But here we probably speak not just about Orientalism, classical Orientalism. We are speaking about the branch of Orientalism, which is called Turkophobia. There is certain elements of Islamophobia. We see that in the Western media, especially, they treat conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan something they always emphasize. It's the Christian, they are Muslims. So that's the one element of double standards. The second, it's the political inclination, political situation in domestic politics of those countries, like in the United States, in France, with large Armenian diaspora. So local politicians tend to support, and they want to get the votes, local constituency support. For that reason, what's happening in terms of the international law, in terms of the killing, displacements of thousands of people, they don't care about that. They need to serve their constituency. That's the second factor. The third factor, I think the larger geopolitical interest sometimes. Let's consider, again, very briefly, when this movement, Miatsum, began in Armenia, it was still the Soviet Union. And I think that many in the Western countries, especially liberals, they saw this as an opportunity to dismantle the Soviet Union. I mean, if ethnic groups start fighting each other, it will basically will undermine the Soviet identity. I mean, the Soviet was empire, and the fate of probably every empire ends one day, and it ended in 91. But the way it's played out in the South Caucasus, that means the one ethnic group, Armenians, they launched campaign against another and occupied territory of another. For Western liberals, it was fine. They didn't care because it served their interest. They basically disregarded completely the suffering of Azerbaijanis, displacements, the killing, murders, rapes, because they had one narrative. So that's the liberation movement, self-determination movement. I think the Armenian nationalists, especially their links with Armenian diaspora, and through Armenian diaspora with Western intellectuals, they knew how to promote their narrative. They quickly changed the term Miatsum, they put it aside, and we started speaking about self-determination after 91, after the Soviet Union collapsed. That was the skillfully designed campaign to attract the voices of Western liberal intellectuals. The movement, Armenian movement, nationalist movement, has nothing to do with the liberal ideas. It was the jingoist, chauvinist, in a sense, nationalist sense, idea to create larger Armenia at the expense of the neighboring territories. But we knew how to promote it, so that was third factor. If it's one is religious, the second is the local politics, diaspora. The third one, it was this appeal, self-determination, liberation. And of course, we're speaking also about the geopolitical interest of the certain powers. In 90s, Russia used Armenia as a tool against Azerbaijan's desire to move, with Western partners. At that time, the Russian government in 90s, they viewed negatively government in Azerbaijan, etc. But later on, it was more the Western powers. They thought that, especially in these days, they thought that they can use Armenia to oust Russia from the region. So anyway, the fact that Armenia was just kind of tool, proxy tool, in Russian hands, in Western hands, but unfortunately, it resulted in tragedies, in the killings and displacement of people. That's, I think, implication and repercussion of double standards.
So from your speech, I come to that conclusion that double standard practices not only endanger the regional architecture, but also international architecture. The implicit but clear assumption is that when Western and non-Western values diverge, the latter are considered to be wrong. Why non-Western governments are considered to be norm violators? On the other hand, Western governments are considered to be norm setters and enforcers. Why is that?
Yeah, it's a good question. Probably we going to the more, we have to look at the history of the last 200-300 years old. I mean, the world is now dominated by Western powers. The empires formed even in the late 18th century. It's French Empire, British Empire, and our European powers, which conquered vast amount of territories in Latin America, in Africa, and Asia specifically. For our understanding our problem in the South Caucasus, that's the I think important to keep in mind. So we conquered those territories. We conducted different policies, ethnic cleansing, exploitation of local population. But we needed also to claim moral superiority over people they conquered. So the narrative was, you are backward, we are superior. And it also happened that technologically, also these powers, European powers, Western powers, were superior than people in Asia and in Africa at that time. Now technology moves towards East, so we'll see how it's going to play on a historical term, or whether we will see that, because it's longer. We're speaking about 100 years. But for the last 200-300 years, it was the Western technological superiority which allowed them to conquer those territories and also to claim moral superiority with regard to American Indians, with regard to African black population, and etc., Asian population, Muslim population. So that's why they can promote the term civilizing mission, French, la mission civilisatrice, burden of white man. So all that to claim that we brought you innovation, technology, but we also brought you better rules of law. We've seen those repercussions, double standards, when things happen in the Middle East, in the Caucasus, in Central Asia. But that's the situation. This is the reality. 1,000 years ago, technological innovation was in Arab empires, in Arab world. Before that, it was, let's say, Greco-Roman Empire, etc. So the civilization is moving. One nation is becoming more technologically superior to others, and that allows them also to claim that we're doing something better for the best interest of those people.
Currently there is little appetite to examine the negative role by Western politicians, diplomats, as they apply double standard practices frequently and consistently in specific areas of the world. How do you think, can a united approach from non-Western governments, policymakers, mitigate the negative role played by the Western governments?
The experts increasingly speaking about so-called global South. The problem also with the global South and with some countries, regional powers in non-Western world, that they also pursue their own national interest. Sometimes they want to be regional hegemons. They basically doing the same what the Western powers did during colonial era. That is the negative side of. But in the meantime, overall, the voice of Global South, I think, is very important, because if we put aside the question of the regional ambitions of certain powers, non-Western powers, the overall there is understanding that the values should be, we're speaking about global values, we speak about international law as a set of laws and regulations which should be applicable to everyone. The country, for example, which claims the moral superiority, United States, they are, by the way, they are not participating in many international legal instruments. Basically, they are positioned to be isolationist in terms of the international legal system. So I think, back to your question, Global South will become more important. Not only Global South, because Global South specifically means Latin America, Africa, Asia, but non-Western powers. The threat, as I said, that some of the non-Western powers, they have their own regional ambitions.
According to some intellectual circles, the world is getting more and more aggressive day by day compared with past decades. If in the past, actors, state actors or other international actors, behaved according to some diplomatic etiquette. They limit their behaviors within some diplomatic etiquettes. Now they can breach any rule without any hesitation and any excuse. To what extent do you agree with this assumption?
Yeah, absolutely. We see that the events in again in our region, and larger region, for example, just let's say one figure. We see a lot of pressure now in Azerbaijan in terms of what happened in Karabakh and Second Karabakh War. But the truth that it was very precise in terms of military, very precise operation with low casualty among civilians, 2%. We're speaking about 2% of civilian casualties during the Second Karabakh War. Basically, we have a number, official number, 50 Armenians died, 50 civilians died during Second Karabakh War, and 100 Azerbaijanis died. So twice more Azerbaijanis died than Armenians during Karabakh War, civilians. And Armenians targeted indeed civilians not in the conflict zone, but far in cities like Ganja, which was 100 kilometers away from the front line. So it was specifically very targeted. Azerbaijanis conducted operation precisely, 2%. If you look at the American operation, United States operation in Afghanistan, 16% of casualties, 16 versus 2%. Russian war in Ukraine, we're speaking about even more, higher percentage. So it was very precise operation against Armenian armed forces, but still we have much more negative coverage. Why? Because again, we're speaking about double standards.
In fact, one of the duties of international institutions is preventing such kind of double standard policies. But they are so powerless in front of such kind of challenges. Why do you think they are so incompetent at preventing the application of double standard practices?
Every international institution was created in certain circumstances with certain goal. If you're speaking about United Nations, it was the institution of winners of the Second World War, and they have certain privileges. They created certain privileges for themselves. Security Council, the right of veto. So that's why it really limits the application of certain single principles. If we're speaking of our regional institutions, some institution has consensus procedure which prevent, if one country is against, then basically destroys the whole approach. So, I mean, every international institution has, again, some limitations. But the problem now, specifically for the last 20 years, we thought that after Cold War it will be the triumph of the international law, triumph of the certain, let's say, rules of law at the international arena. But after the Cold War, United States used this as a single power, as a unipolar, in this so-called unipolar moment for their own interests, completely disregarded international law, their invasions, their actions. And then later on, other powers said, okay, we will do the same. We also will disregard. So we've seen the also invasions at the regional scale, wars. Unfortunately, we are at a very dangerous moment, let's say, in international affairs, because the countries, I would say, stop believing in application of international law and single standards.
So reforms are needed in international institutions?
Well, reforms needed, but also probably we're speaking about completely new approach. Maybe that will come with some significant conflict at the global scale, unfortunately. Sometimes the wars, like global wars, Second World War, caused the creation of United Nations. The First World War was caused the creation of League of Nations. So God forbid we will see the Third World War, but maybe something indeed is needed to change this kind of selfish behavior of the regional and global powers.
Mr. Shafiyev, thank you for comprehensive replies. It was a pleasure to talk to you. American professor and public intellectual Noam Chomsky said, "For the powerful, the crimes are those that others commit." Today with my guest, we try to delve into the double standard practices and its ramifications. Thank you for watching. See you next time.